Well, good evening, everyone. It is good to have you with us tonight. Take your hymnals, if you will, and let's sing 529, number 529, Because He First Loved Me. There is a name I love to hear, I love to sing its worth. It sounds like music in my ear, the sweetest name on earth. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Because He first loved me. It tells me of a Savior's love who died to set me free. It tells me of His precious blood, the sinner's perfectly. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus, because He first loved me. It tells me what my Father hath in store for every day. And though I tread a darksome path, yield sunshine all the way. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus, because He first loved me. It tells of one whose loving heart can feel my deepest woe, who in each sorrow bears a part that none can bear below. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus, because He first loved me. You may be seated.
Good evening. It's good to see everybody here this evening. Everybody but Brother Brian, who unfortunately has an ear infection on top of the other things that he's dealing with. So we want to put him on the top of our prayer list this evening. And I'm getting my phone out here because I'm going to read from my phone, because it's bigger print than my Bible and the light's better. I want to talk tonight about the book of Esther. And the book of Esther is considered, some people say, well, it doesn't belong in the Bible because God isn't mentioned. But let me tell you, His fingerprints are all over the story. And by the time we get through, I think you'll see and understand this. The story actually explains the basis of the Feast of Purim. You may have heard of the Jewish Feast of Purim, and it all comes from the book of Esther. And it's a story, I call it the book of coincidences, and you'll see that also. And it's a story of unmerited reward and unrewarded merit, too. There's several little things like that go through this. And I've got a lot of scripture to read, so I'm going to go ahead and start up. We're starting in Esther, chapter 1, verse 5. Chapter 1, verse 1. Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, this is Ahasuerus who reigned from India even unto Ethiopia over 107 provinces. That in those days, when the king Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan the palace, in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast unto all his princes and his servants, the power of Persia and Media, the nobles and the princes of the provinces being before him, when he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his excellent majesty many days, even 180 days, 180 days. And when these days were expired, the king made a feast unto all the people that were present in Shushan the palace, both unto great and small, 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. So, big feast, 180-day celebration, bragging about all of what he had, and then a 7-day feast. Let's continue on to verse 10 through 12. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, and Abagtha, Zethar, and, get this one, Carcass, the 7 chamberlains that served in the presence of Ahasuerus the king, to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the crown royal, to show the people and the princess her beauty, for she was fair to look on. But the queen Vashti refused to come at the king's commandment by his chamberlains. Therefore was the king very wroth, and his anger burned in him. So he wanted to show the queen off. He had shown all of his riches and all like that, and she refused. This caused the men there in Shushan the palace a problem. Memucan answered it before the king and the princes, Vashti the queen hath not done wrong to the king only, but also to all the princes, to all the people that are in all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus. For this deed of the queen shall come abroad unto all women, so that they shall despise their husbands in their eyes, when it shall be reported, the king Ahasuerus commanded Vashti the queen to be brought in before him, but she came not. We're going to be in a world of trouble if the queen can get away with this. Our wives aren't going to pay any attention to us. That was the gist of that little thing. So commencing with verse 21 of chapter 1. And the saying, they recommended that there be published throughout all the empire, 127 provinces, that all the wives should give to their husbands honor. You've got to respect your husband. It's a commandment of the king. So the saying pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. For he sent letters unto all the king's provinces, into every province according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language, that every man should bear rule in his own house, and that it should be published according to the language of every people. So Vashti caused a problem. Now, we're going to read about Esther and Mordecai. Esther was Mordecai's cousin. He took to raise her when both of her parents died. And when she was chosen to be queen, the king did not know that she was related to Mordecai, nor did he know that she was Jewish. So let's read chapter 2, verses 2 through 4. Then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, Vashti is still on the outs, okay? Let there be fair young virgins sought for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather together all the fair young virgins unto Shushan the palace, to the house of the women, according to unto the custody of Haggai, the king's chamberlain, keeper of the women, and let their things for purification be given them, and let the maiden which pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. And the thing pleased the king, and he did so. So they're looking for all the beautiful young girls in the kingdom. This is a big kingdom, 127 provinces. it's basically, well, what was it we just read from in chapter 1? From India even to Ethiopia. So it's basically in the entire area that we would refer to as the Middle East today. Continuing in verse 5 through 11. Now in Shushan the palace there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite of the tribe of Benjamin, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity which had been carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. And he brought up Hadassah, that is, Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother, and the maid was fair. The maid was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took for his own daughter. So Hadassah means myrtle, but for some reason she was also called Esther, which means star. So we know her, of course, as Esther. Continuing on. So it came to pass when the king's commandment and his decree was heard, and when many maidens were gathered together unto Shushan the palace to the custody of Hegai, that Esther was brought also into the king's house to the custody of Hegai, keeper of the women. Now just a few verses before it was Hege, H-E-G-E. Now it's H-E-G-A-I. I wish they'd be consistent. And the maiden pleased him, and she obtained kindness of him. And he speedily gave her things for purification, such things as belonged to her, and 7 maidens, which were meet or appropriate to be given to her out of the king's house. And he preferred her and her maids unto the best place in the house of the women. Esther had not showed her people, nor her kindred, for Mordecai had charged her that she should not show it. Don't tell anybody. And Mordecai walked every day before the court of the women's house to know how Esther did and what should become of her. So, the big roundup of all the pretty girls in the entire kingdom, they're all brought to Shushan the palace, and this includes Esther. Now, there's a link here, though. You know, we read that Mordecai was the son of, let me make sure I get this correctly. Come on. It must have been the last. Oh, yeah. The son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish. So let's go back to the book of 2 Samuel. And this is when Absalom was rising up against his father David. And rather than have bloodshed in Jerusalem, David and most of his court left Jerusalem. On his way out, there was a guy by the name of Shimei who was throwing rocks at him and cursing him. There was one of his men, and I can't remember the man's name, and I didn't put it down here. He said, "Let me go over and cut this guy's head off." And David said, "No, perhaps the Lord told him to curse me." Just David was gracious. Well, guess what? This was the ancestor. Shimei was the ancestor of Mordecai. So if David had not been gracious, we wouldn't have Mordecai. We'd have somebody else perhaps in this story. Let me continue on here in chapter 2, verse 16. Now, So Esther was taken into King Ahasuerus into his house royal in the 10th month, which is the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. So the feast was in the 3rd year of his reign. So 4 years have passed from the time when Vashti displeased the king until when Esther is brought before the king. And the king loved Esther above all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. So he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. And moving down to verse 21, in those days, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, he wasn't in the king's court, but he hung around because he wanted to know what was going on with his adopted daughter. Two of the king's chamberlains, Bigthan and Teresh, of those which kept the door, were wroth, were angry, and sought to lay hand on King Ahasuerus. And the thing was known to Mordecai, who told it unto Esther the queen, and Esther certified the king thereof in Mordecai's name. And when inquisition was made of the matter, it was found out. Therefore they were both hanged on a tree, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles before the king. So here we have the unrewarded merit. Mordecai saved the king's life, and it was recorded, but they didn't do anything. So let's continue on in chapter 3, because now we have unmerited reward. It's just the flip-flop. It's just the opposite. In these days did King Ahasuerus promote Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes that were with him. And all the king's servants that were in the king's gate bowed and reverenced Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence. So here Haman, no reason is given for Haman being honored above everybody else. Now Haman was an Agagite, a descendant of Agag, the king of the Amalekites. And the hatred of Haman that Haman shows for the Jews is a result of this continuing enmity between the Amalekites and the Jews. Haman, whose name means magnificent, he was arrogant, and he came into favor with the king over all the other nobles of the kingdom, but the reason is unexplained. And as I say, the favor he received was unmerited. And Mordecai, whose name means little man, discovered the plot to assassinate the king and saved his life, but Mordecai's merit was not rewarded. Continuing in chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. And when Haman saw that Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence, then was Haman full of wrath, and he sought scorn to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had showed him the people of Mordecai. Wherefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews that were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, even the people of Mordecai. So initially he just wanted to get Mordecai. When he found out he was a Jew, he wanted to kill all the Jews. And verse 7, in the first month, that is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast Pur, P-U-R, singular, a lot, that is the lot, before Haman the day, from day to day and from month to month, and to the 12th month, that is the month Adar. So Haman determined by casting lots, and that's what Purim means. Purim, P-U-R-I-M, is plural. It's lots. Pur is one. It's like one dice. Whatever method they used, they cast something. They threw a dice, or it probably wasn't a die. Probably wasn't a die. That's singular for dice. But it was something where they determined, maybe it was a simple black and white, yes, no. But he determined when he was going to have all the Jews killed by casting the lot. So then Haman goes to the king, Verse 8, and Haman said unto King Ahasuerus, there's a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of thy kingdom, and their laws are diverse from all people, neither keep they the king's laws. Therefore it is not for the king's profit to suffer them. If it please the king, let it be written that they may be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those that have the charge of the business, to bring it into the king's treasuries. And the king took his ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the Jews' enemy. And the king said unto Haman, the silver is given to thee, and the people also, to do with them as it seemeth good to thee. And then were the king's scribes called on the 13th day of the first month, and there was written according to all that Haman had commanded unto the king's lieutenants and the governors that were over every province, and the rulers of every people to every province, according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language, in the name of King Ahasuerus, as it was written and sealed with the king's ring. Whew. So he sent out all this stuff this was the 12th year. So now this is 5 years. Esther's been queen for 5 years. This thing has really been kind of dragging along. So, but Haman's sort of like the devil. You know, he a mixture of truth and lies, deceived the king, and to have all the Jews put to death. And the date of this event was determined by casting lots. So verse 13, and the letters were sent by posts unto all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish. This sounds like language from the actual decree, because it sounds like something a lawyer would say, right? To cause, to kill, and to cause to perish, to destroy, to kill, and cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, even upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. The writing, the copy of the writing for a command to be given in every province was published unto all people, that they should be ready against that day. The posts went out, being hastened by the king's commandment, and the decree was given in Shushan the palace. And the king and Haman sat down to drink. But the city of Shushan was perplexed. They couldn't understand, why would the king do something like this? In Jeremiah chapter 3, verse 14, the Lord presents a picture of Israel as his bride, an unfaithful bride in that particular case. The Lord has always viewed Israel as his bride. After he redeemed his people out of slavery in Egypt, he proposed what you might call a marriage contract. We would call that the Ten Commandments. And as we know, Moses went up on Mount Sinai to receive the Ten Commandments. He was gone a long time. And so here's faithless Israel. They committed spiritual adultery. Really. Here's the bride-to-be committing adultery, spiritual adultery, with the golden calf. The Lord was so angry that he delayed the marriage between himself and Israel. Instead, and praise his name, you and I who are not Jewish, instead he made someone else to be the spring bride. In Isaiah 65:1, the Lord says, I revealed myself to those who did not ask for me. I was found by those who did not seek me. To a nation that did not call on my name, I said, here am I, here am I. And the word nation in this passage in Hebrew is goy. If you know any Jewish people, goy is used today. The word is still used today, and it means a Gentile. The Lord was turning to the Gentiles. He allowed himself to be found by the Gentiles. The Gentiles became the spring bride. And then, of course, Israel is now the fall bride. Have you ever wondered, by the way, In Matthew chapter 25, the story of the 10 virgins, have you ever wondered why the bride is not mentioned or named? It's because the book of Matthew was written to Jews, and the bride is a Gentile. Continuing on, in this story, Esther, the bride of the king, is a type of the church, the bride of Christ. So let me continue reading in chapter 5, verse 1. Now it came to pass on the third day that Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the... Did I skip a chapter? Because... Yes, I did. Whew. Thank goodness this thing changes chapters real quick. I'm sorry, daggone. So the letters were sent, to kill everybody, that kind of stuff. And then chapter 4. When Mordecai perceived all that was done, Mordecai rent his clothes and put on sackcloth with ashes, a typical Jewish reaction, and went out into the midst of the city and cried with a loud and bitter cry, and came even before the king's gate, for none might enter into the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. Skipping down to verse 4. So Esther's maids and her chamberlains came and told it her. Then was the queen exceedingly grieved, and she sent raiment to clothe Mordecai. Here's some clothes. And to take away his sackcloth from him, but he received it not. Then called Esther for Hatak, one of the king's chamberlains, whom he had appointed to attend upon her, and gave him a commandment to Mordecai, to know what was and why it was. So Hatak went forth to Mordecai unto the street of the city, which is before the king's gate. And Mordecai told him of all that had happened unto him, and the sum of the money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasury for the Jews to destroy them. He also gave him the copy of the writing of the decree, which was given at Shushan to destroy them, to show it unto Esther, and to declare it unto her, and to charge her that she should go into the king to make supplication for him, and to make a request before him for his people. So the news came back to Esther. And Hatak came and told Esther the words of Mordecai, and Esther spoke unto Hatak, however you say that, and gave him commandment unto Mordecai. And all the king's servants and all the people of the king's province do know that whatsoever a man or woman shall come into, whosoever shall come in unto the king into the inner court, who has not been called, there is one law of his, to put him to death, except such to whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter, that he may live. She continues on, but I have not been called to come into the king these 30 days. So she says, I can't do this. Mordecai continues. So when they told Mordecai Esther's words, then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place, but thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And here's this famous phrase, and who knows whether thou art come into the kingdom for such a time as this. Verse 16, go gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye. This is a command from Esther to go to all the Jews in Shushan and tell them to fast for her, neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. Also, I also and my maidens will fast likewise. So I will go into the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. So that was Esther's decision. And so we're coming into the good part here, okay? It's going to get good in just a second. This is all background, all right? Let me continue on here in chapter 5, which since I skipped chapter 4. Now it came to pass on the third day that Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's house over against the king's house. And the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house over against the gate of the house. And it was so when the king saw Esther, Esther the queen, standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. So she didn't lose her life for going in to see the king. And then the king said unto her, What wilt thou, Queen Esther, and what is thy request? It shall be given thee even to half the kingdom. That's quite an offer. And Esther answered, If it seem good unto the king, let the king and Haman come this day unto the banquet that I have prepared for him. Then the king said, Cause Haman to make haste, and may he do as Esther hath said. So the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. And the king said unto Esther at the banquet of wine, What is thy petition? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? Even up to half the kingdom it shall be performed. Then answered Esther and said, My petition and my request is, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my petition and to perform my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet that I shall prepare for them, and I will do tomorrow as the king hath said. So I've wondered for a long time, she went to see the king, she had the time to set up this banquet, and she says, we're going to do it tomorrow. And of course the king agreed because he loved Esther. But more than that, this is a setup to get Haman, okay? It's a giant setup. Let me continue on here with the latter part of verse 10. So Haman, when he went home, sent for all of his friends, called for his friends and Zeresh his wife, and Haman told them of the glory of his riches and the multitude of his children. He had 10 sons. And all the things wherein the king had promoted him, and how he had advanced him above the princes and the servants of the king. And he's just bragging on and on about, how great he is and all like that. And he continues, Yet all this availeth me nothing, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting in the king's gate. So then said Zeresh his wife, and all his friends unto him, Let a gallows be made 50 cubits high, and tomorrow speak thou unto the king, that Mordecai may be hanged on it. Then go thou merrily with the king into the banquet, and the thing pleased Haman, and he caused the gallows to be made. So, like I say, now we're getting to the good part. This gallows, 50 cubits high, that's 75 feet. That's not efficient. You don't need this is a symbolic number. I'm not sure what it symbolizes. 50 in the Bible is the number of redemption. The Jubilees, 50 years, the land is redeemed back. The day of Pentecost, the 50th day, the church was redeemed. The church's birthday was about redemption. So I think it was a symbolic number. But now for the good part, because now we're coming up. This, like I say, this is the book of coincidences, okay? So let's read chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. On that night, the king could not sleep. Excuse me, let me get back to 16th century syntax. On that night could not the king sleep, and he commanded to bring the book of records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's chamberlains, the keepers of the door, who sought to lay hand on the king Ahasuerus. And the king said, "What honor and dignity hath been done to Mordecai for this?" Then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, "There is nothing done for him." So, we have a coincidence coming here. Verse 5. The king said, verse 4, the king said, "Who's in the court?" Now Haman just happened to come into the outward court of the king's house to speak unto the king to hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. And the king's servant said to him, "Behold, Haman standeth in the court." And the king said, "Let him come in." So Haman came in, and the king said unto him, "What shall be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor?" Now Haman thought in his heart, "To whom else would the king delight to do honor more than me?" Haman was all about himself. Haman answered the king, "For the man whom the king delighteth to honor, let the royal apparel be brought, which the king uses to wear, and the horse that the king rideth upon, and the crown royal which is set upon his head. And let this apparel and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that they may array the man withal, whom the king delighteth to honor, and bring him on horseback through the street of the city, and proclaim before him, Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delighteth to honor." I love this. I guess you can tell that, huh? Okay. Then the king said unto Haman, "Make haste, and take the apparel and the horse, as thou hast said, and even do so unto Mordecai the Jew, that sitteth at the king's gate. Let nothing fail of all that you have spoken." I'm sorry, I like that. Great coincidence there. So when the omission was noted, the king tried to correct it. And of course, Mordecai, Haman was just humiliated by all this. And Mordecai in this story is a type of the Messiah, a type of Jesus. He was honored while sitting on the king's horse and dressed in the king's robe. Later we find that Mordecai was second in command in the entire kingdom of Persia. Only the king was superior to him. This is just like Jesus. Only God the Father is superior to the Lord Jesus. This was an honor, of course, that Haman intended for himself. And after he did it, he was mortified and just went home. So he went home to complain. "Do you know what happened to me today?" And while they were yet talking with him, came the king's chamberlains and hasted to bring Haman unto the banquet that Esther had prepared. So he didn't even have a chance to plan what else he was going to do. So chapter 7, verse 1. So the king and Haman came to the banquet with Esther the queen. And the king said again unto Esther on the second day at the banquet of wine, "What is thy petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? And it shall be performed, even to half the kingdom." Then Esther the queen answered and said, "If I have found favor in thy sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. for we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. But if we had been sold for bondmen and bondwomen, I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage. Then King Ahasuerus answered and said unto Esther the queen, Who is he, and where is and where is he that durst presume in his heart to do so? And Esther the queen said, The adversary and the enemy is this wicked Haman. Then Haman was afraid before the king and queen. He went from being on the top of the world down really low. And the king, arising from the banquet of wine in his wrath, went into the garden, into the palace garden, and Haman stood up to make request for his life to Esther the queen, for he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king. So here we have, guess what? Another coincidence coming. Then the king returned out of the palace of garden into the place of the banquet of wine, and Haman was just fallen upon the bed or the couch whereon Esther was. Then said the king, Will he force the queen also before me in the house? As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. They had a sack there ready. I think what this tells us is that Haman was not popular with the palace staff. Haman was arrogant, and he probably just lorded it over everybody, and they didn't like him. And they were happy to take care of this. So then, one of the staff here, Harbona, one of the chamberlains, said before the king, Behold also the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who had spoken good for the king, standeth in the house of Haman. Then the king said, Hang him on it. Another great coincidence there. And then chapter 7, verse 10. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath was pacified. Chapter 8. On that day did King Ahasuerus give the house of Haman, the Jews' enemy, unto Esther the queen. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told the relation. And the king took off his ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. So there's apparently a lapse of time here. But the king gave the estate of Haman to Esther, and she placed Mordecai over it. And Esther spake yet again before the king, and fell down at his feet, and besought him with tears to put away the mischief of Haman the Agagite, and his device that he had devised against the Jews. So, Haman was out of the way, but the problem was still there. So verse 7. Then the king Ahasuerus said unto Esther the queen, and to Mordecai the Jew, Behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and him they have hanged upon the gallows, because he laid his hand upon the Jews. Write ye also for the Jews as it liketh you. Write whatever you want in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring, which he had given to Mordecai. For the ring which is written in the king's name, and sealed with, for the writing which is written in the king's name, and sealed with the king's ring, may no man reverse. Then were the king's scribes called at that time, that is the month of Sivan, and on the 23rd day thereof. And it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded unto the Jews, and to the lieutenants and deputies and rulers of the provinces which were from India to Ethiopia, 120, 100, 127 provinces, unto every province according to the writing thereof, and unto every people after their language, and to the Jews according to their writing, and according to their language. And he wrote in the king Ahasuerus' name, and sealed it with the king's ring, and sent letters by posts on horseback, and riders on mules, camels, and young dromedaries. So the word went out. Things have changed. Verse 15, and Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white, and with a great crown of gold, and with a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor. What a switch, what a change. So this, we're finding out the reason for the celebration of Purim. This celebration usually occurs in February. And as I said, Purim is the Hebrew word for lots, because that's how Haman determined the date of the destruction of the Jews. So they were slated for destruction on Adar 13, but instead they defeated their enemies, the Amalekites, on the same day. Let me read chapter 9 here, verse 10. The Jews were allowed on this day, verse 5, they smote all of their enemies. They took care of things. They knew who the people were that hated them and were looking forward to killing them. Verse 10, the 10 sons of Haman, they are listed before. I'll spare myself the reading of all the names, okay? The 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews, they slew they. But on the spoil they laid not their hand. What does that mean? Let's look again here just a few verses later in verse 16. But the other Jews that were in the king's provinces gathered themselves together and stood for their lives, and had rest from their enemies, and slew of their foes 75,000. But they laid not their hands on the prey. So what's this stuff about not taking any spoil? Well, for this, we've got to go back about 500 years. 1 Samuel chapter 15, the Lord had instructed King Saul to destroy all of the Amalekites and everything that belonged to them. The account that is found here in the book of Esther has its beginnings back there. Saul did not obey the Lord. He captured King Agag, the king of the Amalekites, but he didn't kill him. But then there's more. Saul was told to destroy everything that the Amalekites owned, but he kept the best of the livestock for himself. Now when Samuel came up and said, what's this I hear? What's this bleating and mooing and whatever I'm hearing? And Saul said, well, the soldiers kept the best of the livestock, but we killed everything else. And but this is where Samuel made his famous statement, to obey is better than sacrifice. So let me read a little bit from chapter 10. Chapter 10 is a very short chapter. I can read the whole chapter in about 15 seconds. Oh goodness, I've lost the whole place. And the king Ahasuerus laid a tribute upon the land and upon the isles of the sea, and all of the acts of his power and of his might, and the declaration of the greatness of Mordecai, whereunto the king advanced him. Are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was next unto King Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews, and accepted of the multitude of his brethren, seeking the wealth of his people, and speaking peace to all his seed. They lived happily ever after. So, the book of Esther was the result of King Saul's disobedience about 500 years before. And the Jews recognized what was going on here. They recognized they were completing something that began long ago. So Saul took spoil when he was told not to. He was told to destroy everything. And so to correct this taking of spoil or booty or whatever you want to call it by Saul, they didn't touch anything. And that was the point that was made twice there in chapter 9. But on the spoil laid they not their hand. It was repeated a few verses later. So now, remember, Haman was an Agagite, a descendant of King Agag, the king of the Amalekites. If Saul had been obedient, none of this would have happened. The story of Esther would not have been necessary. But our God, who is very patient, brought about the result that he intended many years before. And that's the story of Esther. It's all about correcting something that was not done long ago. So I hope you found out something about Esther that you never knew. By the way, Ahasuerus, we know him better by the name Xerxes. So if you were wondering about that. And this occurred about 440 BC, something like that. And an interesting story. And as I said, people say, well, that book doesn't belong in the Bible. I believe it does for two. I've talked about the golden lampstand, the design that the Lord gave to Moses on Mount Sinai, and it's 66 decorations divided into 39 and 27, just like our Bible. That tells me what we got in the Bible was exactly what the Lord intended, including the book of Esther. In addition to that, we have a brother. His name is Yaakov Ramsel. Yaakov is the Hebrew way of saying Jacob. Brother Ramsel, he was a preacher, and of course he spoke Hebrew. And when this stuff came out about the Bible codes and words found encoded at what they call equidistant letter spacing, like every 10 letters pick up a letter and it'll spell a word. And they tried this in other books in Hebrew and it didn't work. It only works in the Bible, in the Old Testament. But they did this with computers and they found fascinating stuff. Brother Ramsel did it manually. He would write the letters in columns, like say, for example, 10 letters. And then he could just read across if there was a word formed. And he found all kinds he found the name of God, he found the name of disciples, things like that in the book of Esther. But it doesn't matter because it belongs there. And as I said, the Lord's fingerprints are all over this story. And I love the coincidences. Oh, and it's time for me to quit here. Brother Joel, if you will part us from the streaming company, and we'll have our prayer requests.